Welcome back to Raised by Giants Illuminated Insights discussion. We are live. Welcome everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys and any moderators or members out there. I hope you guys are strapped in because we have psychotherapist Robert Filocco with us today. But a quick reminder, super chats and super stickers are available. Also, PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description as well and are a great way to help support the show and help support my work. And a big thank you to everyone that's contributed to help support the show. Really appreciate each and every one of you. Couldn't do this without you. So returning back to the show today, he's a psychotherapist with interest in UFOs, the paranormal, and most work of Rudolf Steiner. He researches theories of nature, of karma, and its role in understanding human destiny and purpose. Robert, welcome back to the show. How's it going, my friend?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, welcome back. It's good to see you, and I've been looking forward to discussing some theosophy and theology with you, Robert. It's one of my favorite things to do, which brings about expansion of new thoughts and ideas for the audience and for me as well. But for the audience, since it's been a while since you've been on, it's been almost a year now. Let the audience know how a psychotherapist becomes interested in some of the things you would consider early mystics of our time.
Before I got into psychology, before I was a psychotherapist, I had some contact experiences myself back when I was 8 years old with mantid beings. That's how it got started. I'm sure that influenced me to be interested in a lot of topics like this early on. I remember reading about karma and reincarnation when I was in elementary school. Later on, I wrote an independent study in college with an anthropology professor on UFOs. So I was interested in this even before I got into psychology. Later on, I got my graduate degree and started practicing in the field. And for a while, I kind of got away from interest in UFOs and paranormal. Really got back into that a lot in the last 15, 20 years or so. So that, in a nutshell, is it. I've always thought the UFO phenomena in particular is a real window into what's going on in the world. Last 10 years or so, I've gotten more into studying Rudolf Steiner. I studied Gurdjieff. I studied other spiritual systems as well, and I think it's all pretty much tied together in different ways in terms of kind of where we're heading in human destiny, human history. I think we're living in interesting times, as they say.
Absolutely. Now, as a psychotherapist, did your methods of interacting with patients that have mental illness or need some form of psychiatric care change when you really started diving deep into these kinds of topics for yourself?
I wouldn't say so. To some degree, I was always open to the idea of. Um, I really never completely bought into the whole mechanistic view of mental health and diagnoses and things of that nature. I mean, they're markers, they're useful. I worked with schizophrenics for quite a while and had some pretty interesting experiences with them. I was convinced that they could definitely tap into other dimensions that they were experiencing, but unlike the shamanic traditions or people who are trained, they can't really control what's happening to them. They just are almost passive victims of a lot of content that comes up, a lot of their experiences. They also don't have a frame of reference in this culture to really make sense of what they're experiencing. So um, I was always open to the idea that schizophrenia wasn't just a biological imbalance. Worked a lot with uh, sensitive people, often diagnosed with ADHD, OCD, autism. In the past 10 years, that's become more of my practice specialty. And those are definitely individuals who have very high emotional intelligence, um, a great deal of empathy, very creative, out of the box thinkers. I just see them as all one spectrum: autism, ADHD, OCD. There's been a lot of good material written on that topic recently that started to move the whole thought process away from uh, thinking in terms of pathology and looking at a lot of the gifts that these individuals have. a lot of them do have what we would call spiritual experiences. I think probably to a greater degree than maybe the typical population. You see synesthesia with them. You see a lot of unusual sensory processing. They seem to be connected with other realities more easily. So it's I can't say it's. I think that one has gone hand in hand with the other. I couldn't really tease them out and say one has sort of affected the other, but I've always been open to looking at things a little bit differently, I think, than perhaps most psychologists, I guess you could say.
Well, it's interesting because mental wellness seems to be at its height at the moment. It's estimated that more than 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. have a mental illness, and that's coming from the National Institute of Health.
Mhm.
And what I've particularly seen in the past 20 years is that it seems if you're just going through the natural points of your life, right, like the lows and the highs of your life, you go see a psychiatrist, you'll come out of there with some form of mental diagnosis, right? It seems like we've taken the normal everyday life struggles that people have gone through for decades now and turned them into a mental illness. Would you agree
Well,
with that to an extent?
I would agree with that to a great extent. Yeah, I think just the number of diagnoses has, skyrocketed in the past 30 or 40 years with each new DSM. And it's not, I mean, I think that having markers, having general descriptors of what people are experiencing is useful, but not to pathologize it so much. Um, and I think most depression is due to the fact that people aren't living the kind of lives that they want to live. It's not because of a biological imbalance. Even the psychiatric community is getting away from the whole idea of depression being a biological imbalance of serotonin, dopamine, things of that nature. It's just not that simple. There's a small part of the population, I think, that where that applies to. I think it definitely applies to certain uh, experiences like bipolar or schizophrenia. But even those, it's a human experience. It's understanding the human experience that's important. The psychiatry tends just to provide medication at this point. Very few of them do any sort of therapy or really get to know their patients. Now there are exceptions, and there's a number of good psychiatrists I do work with, but as a whole, I think that's where the whole medical community has gone, right? Western medicine, pharmacology. I mean, that's a whole nother rich topic there. But yeah, there's no question that it's easy to label things. I use with my clients, I use the term suffering. If you're suffering, then it's something to look at, rather than labeling it as some sort of disorder or you have a broken brain or whatever. Think, stuff like that. A lot of people with ADHD, um, have really had a hard time. It's a world that's not really built for them. It's being like left-handed in a right-handed world, and that 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 whole spectrum has been pathologized a lot, too much, and over medicated. Um, and there have been a number of voices out there kind of working against that, and viewing the gifts of ADHD. Lara Webb was one of the first. She wrote a great book called The Gift of ADHD back 1999, something like that. So I think that approach is starting to pick up some momentum, and I'm happy to be a part of that. I'm actually working on a paper about that whole topic of neurodiversity and all the gifts that come with that. Also, why it's crucial for our culture to nurture neurodiversity as we go through a very difficult transition period in our history. Um, it's no wonder that we're seeing more people who are neurodiverse. Now, some of that might be due to environmental factors, but I think there's more positive coming out of that than negative. So,
Now, you just mentioned
yeah.
this suffering aspect. Is there any other patterns that you've seen with people that are suffering from with depression or anxiety? I'm just throwing out a few very common ones, but are there any other patterns besides environment that you have noticed off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, clearly, what's going on in the world right now affects people. I mean, what's going on, with the new wars in Ukraine and the Middle East? I think a lot of people who are empaths, and that's a real term. I think there's a lot of people who are, maybe it's overused, but there are people who can't watch the news because it's devastating to them. It's not, not something they can look at abstractly or from a distance. Obviously, COVID had a lot to do with um, an increase in a sense of isolation, hopelessness, helplessness. I think people are emerging from that. Just the lack of belief in any sort of institution right now that has validity. Uh, the cynicism that you see out there is, and some of it is deserved, I guess. Is understandable, but just the lack of belief in any sense of meaning to life, I think, has much more to do with suffering than some sort of biochemical imbalance that we have. You have, the financial stressors that particularly younger generation is dealing with. It's a whole range of ills, right? Um, in the human condition right now. I guess they've always been there, but this is definitely a uniquely challenging period for the future of humanity. I don't think anyone can deny that.
Well, when you think theosophist wise and theology wise, some have said that this is the realm of suffering. Like you can't be here and suffering not exist. Would you agree that we are in a challenging place that suffering is inevitable?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. That's the essence of Buddhism is to accept that and learn how to live with it. Um, I think that there's many spiritual traditions that talk about this planet as being one of the lower planets as far as the development of spirituality, and also a sort of a testing ground for spiritual development. And some people see that as have kind of a cynical perspective on that this is some prison planet, and reptilians are controlling everything, and this narrative is just created so that we stay in line, or we don't buck the buck the system, so to speak. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if you look at our individual lives, often from adversity comes growth, right? It sounds cliche, but it's very true. Uh, I don't think we grow unless we have some tensions, unless there's some internal and external tensions that drive us to evolve, and not just in a biological way. I think that's the least important aspect of our. This is Darwinian evolution. I think it's much more of a spiritual evolution. That's why I think it can. There's been one reason there's been such an explosion of autism and ADHD and OCD and all these diagnoses that have to do with sensitivity, is that there is a uh, an evolution in a positive spiritual evolution occurring too. But it's if you're a sensitive person in this world, you're bound to suffer more than other people. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question, but
And then comes in the whole idea that something or someone is trying to cut us off from that spirituality. So it's making it
mhm.
even more difficult for us to evolve consciously or spiritually and grow in that form because there's something actively out there trying to stun that spiritual and consciousness growth.
So yeah, that I do believe, and that's not a I do tend to believe that there are forces that are and beings that are trying to help us, and others that are trying to hinder us, and that's kind of a classic, good versus evil. I don't think it's quite as simple as maybe like most Christian metaphysics paints, but yeah, I think that there are, what Rudolf Steiner called forces of hindrance, Ahriman and Lucifer, and other beings. He emphasized that we really need to look at ontology, look at the nature of being and the whole variety of beings that we interact with. If you look at how expansive and vast our ecology is just on this planet, how diverse life is, there's no reason to think that there isn't a great diversity out there too, not just uh, on other physical planets in our dimension, but in other dimensions. So I think it's all interconnected. I think that there are different agendas that different species have that have been interacting with us, and some are trying to promote our spiritual evolution, some are not. And again, that's where I get into discussions of, as many people are right now, around artificial intelligence, transhumanism, all the dangers that are involved in that. Um, I've looked. I guess my contribution is to look pretty deeply into Steiner's work and a lot of what he spoke about over 100 years ago in regards to the dangers of those developments. He didn't call them artificial intelligence and transhumanism, but there's plenty of quotes from him that indicate that he knew what was coming. So he's kind of an interesting character in that way.
Now, when it comes to Rudolf Steiner and his personification of Ahriman, or this Ahrimanic influence over humanity, would this Ahrimanic influence not want to make people mentally ill?
Well, I think that the Ahriman in particular wants to promote a crude kind of materialism and try to eliminate any sort of spirituality, connection with a broader cosmos. So in that sense, I think materialism does breed a lot of what I guess you could call mental illness, if you want to use that term. Uh, I don't think we find answers to the meaning of life for us, or purpose of life in just material things. There's also a controlling aspect of Ahriman, and he's, according to Steiner and according to some Rosicrucian traditions as well, he is very much connected to the forces of electricity and magnetism and how they manifest in this world. That electricity is degraded light; it's a degraded form of energy and matter. So are getting caught up more and more in electronics, uh, artificial intelligence. All of what's developing now is entrapping us in what the occultists call this eighth sphere, this sort of a mineralized virtual reality that takes us away from what I've used the term a lot, organic singularity. I very much prefer an organic singularity over an electronic one.
Singularity meaning some form of simulation.
Well, singularity meaning an interconnection of all things, but not through some electronic internet, but through our own abilities to empathize, our own abilities to. I mean, there's plenty of people who are natural telepaths. They don't need to have a phone put in their head by Elon Musk to become telepaths, uh, or these artificial technologies that are just mimicking natural human abilities. That if we focused on those, there's tremendous untapped human potential there, and some of that is some of that would allow us to develop more of a community feeling, more of a empathic interconnection. And that's, again, talking about Steiner. That's what he thought, that there's two directions that human evolution could go in. One is sort of this automatic immoral intelligence with vast wisdom, but no moral compass, or in the direction of an empathic, interconnected human community. He talked about how if human evolution goes in the right direction, at some point we would all be empaths, and we'd all be able to see each other's suffering, understand each other's karma, which is part of this whole system, and be able to help each other in that way. There wouldn't be this sense of division, this separation that we have now. So the Ahrimanic solution is just to have everyone hooked into this, again, this virtual reality, where human beings are more and more actually isolated from each other, and not really fully human.
What do you think of people thinking that we are already in a virtual reality, that what we're living in now is a simulation, a very realistic simulation?
Well, it is. That's what the ancients called Maya, but it's not produced by computers. It's not artificial in nature in that sense. Now, that's always it's kind of silly. The whole computer simulation idea is like who made the computers then? Who created the artificial intelligence that's running this? What was the intelligence behind that? It's as infinite regress to what? You know, um, no, I don't. I think it's a very dangerous idea. It's a very sinister idea in the sense that it again takes us away from our divine capabilities. If you look like remote viewers, these are human beings who are able to do incredible things psychically. If you look at the increased development of people who have advanced empathic and telepathic abilities, you see more and more of that in people who are incarnating now. And again, this is where kind of Mary Rodwell comes in terms of the whole UFO phenomena and the alphabet children, tying it in with a lot of the people that she worked with were diagnosed with autism or ADHD. Um, so I think there's validity. I don't agree with everything that Mary Rodwell believes, but I think there's a lot of validity to her work and PHW Atwater and authors of that nature.
Well, I don't believe in any kind of regression, because the problem is with regression, Robert, is that you can implant any thought idea, you can give really leading questions. And if you're searching for aliens and UFOs and abductions, then that's what you're going to find, especially if you come to a regressionist within the community. If you go to a regressionist, a UFO regressionist, someone that's from the spiritual community, and you've already gone in thinking that something weird happened, that you were abducted by aliens, what do you think that they're going to find? They're going to find aliens every single time, regardless if it's there or not, because it's a part of their profession. It's a part of how they make money. That's why I don't put any kind of sustenance into regression, especially when it comes to, I think regression can be used for really good benefits, like therapeutic benefits, but not going back to find out our memory is already screwed up anyway. We can barely remember what happened last week. You think we're going to be able to remember what happened 4 or 5 years ago? It's to me, it's ridiculous, and it's a way that things can be implanted into your head. You're in a very relaxed state. You're in almost a hypnotic state. You're in a meditative state, and that regressionist can put anything into your subconscious that they want to put in there. That's my
Well,
thoughts on regression.
I'm not a fan of hypnosis or regression. I think that there are plenty of people who have had very conscious memories of a whole range of experiences, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, contact with other intelligences, which I don't necessarily call them alien in the science fiction alien sense, but there are definitely other beings out there that we interact with. Uh, I'm skeptical of most of the use of hypnosis in the UFO community. Uh, People were kind of poorly trained in it. Even John Mack, he developed more skills in it, but initially the person who taught John Mack how to hypnotize people was Bud Hopkins, who obviously had his own agenda, and he was an artist. He wasn't, trained in hypnosis. So I think you have to be really careful in using regression, hypnosis, things of that nature, in figuring out what's going on with all this.
Well, that's how Mary Rodwell got a lot of her information, was through regression and hypnosis of their patients, just like Barbara Lamb as well. It's the exact same thing. So I really
Yeah.
personally, I've had
Mhm.
Mary Rodwell on the show. I had her on
Mhm.
probably a year and a half ago. And
Mhm.
what she says is interesting, but can you take it as factual information when she got all the information from hypnosis and regression?
I think what helps corroborate the general thrust of her work is what we're seeing. Um, you know, not just in terms of UFO phenomena or contacting aliens, but just the growth in psychic abilities that we're seeing. So I think that a lot of people are having very conscious experiences of these things, not that don't require hypnosis, don't require regression. What she tries to do is to go beyond just the person reliving the memory and try to see what intelligence is sort of running the show. Try to figure out like who's behind it, which is a little bit different. That's different than like Bud Hopkins. She also I had a conversation with her. What she told me was she believes that all of the negative experiences of abductees are due to my lab. They're due to the military covert operations, which I don't believe that. So, I'm not I'm not saying she's right about everything by any means. But I think if you look at her work and the work of again Atwater, who's done a lot of interesting work on near-death experiences and the correlations with
Skip
that.
Atwater.
PHW Atwater.
No,
I don't know if you,
Atwater.
yeah,
I'm not for sure
she's
of him. I know Skip Atwater. I know Skip Atwater was a part of the remote viewing unit, the
yeah,
DIA remote
no,
viewing. Not that guy.
no, it's actually a female, and she
Oh,
wrote books on near death experiences, and then she wrote a book called Children of the Fifth World a couple of years ago about what she's seeing in terms of like the alphabet children, just the development of this sort of new species. That's what Mary Rodwell talks about too. I think there's some validity to that as a general pattern because I just see it just in ordinary life. Not people don't have to be. People are just having a lot of spontaneous experiences of synchronicity, of telepathy, of more people are having out of body experiences, near death experiences. I don't think all that's positive either by any means, but it's definitely a phenomenon. So
have you
whether
worked
that's
with people that's had a near death experience or an out of body experience? Because I do think that there
yes,
is some kind of connection here between out of body experiences, near death experiences, and psychic abilities. I've said that to almost
oh no
all
question.
of the remote viewers that I've had on that were officially a part of the DIA Army
Hmm.
Intelligence Stargate project. Some of them agree with me,
Hmm.
some of them disagree with me, but a large majority of people have increased psychic abilities that have been through some sort of near death experience, some sort of out of body experience. It's like a switch gets flipped on. And they counteract that with saying that, well, everybody has the ability to be psychic, everyone has the ability to remote view, which I agree with. I mean, if you practice something enough, you're going to get good at it, regardless of what's going on. But I think that the people that naturally have that ability had some sort of either a trauma to their life, a big trauma, or some sort of out of body experience or a near death experience, which also could involve trauma because people that get into traumatic events normally, sometimes if the trauma is great enough, they will shoot right out of their body, especially like people, within, surgeries, people that are having really big surgeries, they'll say that they're seeing themselves from above. So that would be considered an out of body experience. But I came to that conclusion because reading through all the DIA and Army Intelligence Stargate unclassified documents, it talked about the people that had already had the ability, already had the natural ability. The ability didn't have to be developed, they didn't need to be trained. They automatically already had it. So then I was like,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
how did they get that ability? And then I was going through a lot of Ego Swan's work and a lot of his notes and his diaries and stuff.
Mm,
And he always talked about when he was a kid, he would constantly have out of body experiences because he was bullied a lot whenever he was younger.
mhm.
And that got me thinking, oh, well, there's definitely a connection here because there's several other people that I've talked to that's had a near death experience or an out of body experience that has these natural given psychic abilities.
Okay, I don't think there's any question if you look at the research that people who've had trauma develop enhanced psychic abilities. Some of it is dissociating from the reality they're in and connecting with other realities. Some of it has this kind of survival aspect to it. Um, some people are born with these abilities. Some develop them through practice. Some develop them through trauma. So there's a number of different ways to sort of get there. I think there's more people who are just having spontaneous experiences of without any practice, without any kind of uh, protocols, uh, and that's an interesting phenomenon to me.
Yeah, it is really interesting in how they've changed they changed the name of clairvoyance and clairaudience, and because I believe the ability has been around for a really long time, and they just relabeled it with something different that can be more properly named, and they came
Hmm.
up with the remote viewing title again to slap a label on something to then give it meaning when it was called something else before. It's exactly like the UFO phenomenon. Everyone was calling UFOs for 60, 70 years, and then all of a sudden, not
Peace, yeah.
UFOs anymore, it's UAPs.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, it's controlling the narrative to some degree. And remote viewing is astral projection, basically. It's projecting your mind to a distant location and being able to remote sense. It's not even remote viewing; it's remote sensing. A lot of the that. I mean, a lot of remote viewers talk about other senses besides the visual sense that come through, and some are more acute for certain people than others, probably because those senses are already developed. But I think the main point is that we have tremendous human potential that is not being tapped. And it's great, the government is funding these remote viewers. Well, we could develop these abilities instead of learning, all the nonsense we learn in school that we never use. That could be, I think a better use of education uh, would be developing some of these abilities with some sort of, the difficulty is, you need to have some sort of moral code here too, with this. So I think that's what the spiritual systems. That's what they guarded a lot of the practices that developed these abilities for centuries, so that they weren't misused. Human nature being what it is, there are people who misused it anyway. Whether it's John Dee or Aleister Crowley or whomever, there's sort of the black arts aspect or the left-handed aspect to those traditions too. But they definitely guarded some of these techniques. But I think a lot of that is just happening. It seems to be happening spontaneously now, more so. Now, a great book on this is Coincidences by Sharon Rowlett, where she gets into a whole range of different phenomena. Synchronicities, coincidences, obviously, but just a whole range of different phenomena that people seem to be spontaneously having. She talks about some of her own experiences that guided her from being like a French literature academic into this whole field. A lot of people are being drawn into this from diverse fields, from their own personal experiences that again happen spontaneously. Some are trauma related, some are not. Most of them aren't because of any spiritual practices that that they're following in some rigorous way.
Yeah, and back really quickly to this. Whenever I asked you the question about us being in a holographic simulated reality already,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
you're basically saying that that's a dangerous idea. And
mhm,
I mean, if you look at it from a pessimistic point of view, it can be dangerous. Any thought can be dangerous, right? But it depends on your perspective on that thought form. You can
mhm,
turn something negative into something positive very easily. So the way that I personally believe that we could flip that we're in a simulation, instead of looking at it as everything doesn't matter and life is meaningless and pointless. If that's the way that I think some people would view that, if we are
mhm,
indeed in a simulation, you can look
mhm,
at it in the sense that we as individuals can control and manipulate our reality at will. It would mean that we would have more control over our reality than what we can even perceive. And if we have that kind of control individually, because we are in a simulation, what could we then do collectively? And it gets into this thought and idea, which I'm sure that you're really familiar with, which is the concept of egregores that I've talked about on the show several times. That the egregorical reality, that we can manifest things in our reality depending upon what we think about, what we put our energy into, and what we believe. And if we believe in that, then it comes into our reality. And how would manifestation? This is a question for you, Robert. How would you perceive that manifestation works if we are not in some sort of simulation?
Well, I think, again, the whole concept of Maya, the idea that this is a world that was specially created for us, that is a subset of the entire universe, always made sense to me. And we see only a small amount of the electromagnetic spectrum, never mind, other spectrums. Um, so I think I think the my objection to it is that it's technology based, that it's a technology metaphor. The idea that we can kind of break out of this, whatever it is, whether it's an organic singularity or a computer similarity, of course we can. That's the whole idea of developing ourselves. The whole idea of like lucid dreaming. We can take control of our dreams. More people are getting into lucid dreaming now, right? So we can take control of reality. That's a good part of our experience that is otherwise, almost automatic in nature, or certainly not within our conscious control. So I don't think we need to have a computer artificial technological metaphor for what you're talking about. In fact, I think there's a reality to the dangers of that. If you believe in like a Steiner cosmology where you have these like an Ahrimanic being, an actual being, and a deception going on that's trying to draw us into his world, so to speak. It's kind of like Stranger Things with the upside down world. There's a lot of elements of the modern scene going on there with the whole CERN aspect and these psychic young children have psychic ability and all of that. It's I don't know if it's predictive programming, maybe it is, but I think it's kind of a window into what's going on. I don't think we need to do that. Again, I don't think we need technological enhancements to be able to accomplish what you're talking about. We can do that without. In fact, I think they're an impediment because they create much more of an artificial, automatic intelligence. We'll know more, but what good is having more knowledge if we don't know how to use it, or if we have no moral code to use it?
Also, too, I mean, and this is just speculation and theory as well. If there is this harmonic force that Steiner talks about within his writings,
Mhm.
would he not want some sort of robotic society so then that he could just incarnate in whenever he wants to? He can leave whenever he wants to,
Mhm.
like a robotic society, because I think that our makeup, the way that we are built, is much more complicated to actually pick and choose where you or who you come into. So would it not be easier? Again, 100% speculation, 100% theology and theosophy here. Would it not be easier for some kind of outside force to come into this 3D physical reality if we were all just robots?
Yeah, that's exactly on target. There's some speculation with even amongst anthroposophists that Ahriman's not going to incarnate in a human body, but he'll incarnate through the internet, through the matrix,
Hmm.
or whatever you want to call it. Steiner, if you actually read Steiner, he said that that the incarnation is inevitable. It's what he called an iron necessity. When he used that term, he meant something that was predestined. That some things can change depending upon choices, but that's not something that can change. He pretty much insisted that Ahriman would incarnate in a human body. But certainly, if he's incarnated into a society that's mechanistic, that has mechanistic thinking, that's increasingly controlled by computer intelligence, that's like his heaven. I mean, that's makes it so much easier for him to control things. And control and power are things that he supposedly strives for.
And also, when you think about it too, and like you were mentioning earlier, if these demonic forces, or what Rudolf Steiner calls Ahrimanic forces, run on electricity, then
Mhm.
he would want the people to also be some form of electricity,
Mhm.
so that
Well,
you can
yeah,
infiltrate into the system, right? And that might be the
yeah,
reason why we have all these power lines. That's why we have internet. That's why we have electricity in our homes, and it's never changed.
mhm,
It's never developed. We just keep using the same thing over and over and over again.
mhm,
Nothing, there's not really any innovation as far as the way that we power our homes. There really hasn't been any innovation at all, period, when it comes to our everyday way of life, which is, I think, is very interesting. We're still using the exact same shit that we've been using for 100 years now. We haven't made refrigerators better. We haven't made washers and dryers better. We haven't made microwaves better. The everyday things that we've been using has been the same for a really long time.
yeah. I mean, that brings in the whole angle of Tesla and some other great thinkers and the repression of kind of the world that they wanted to create. But as far as electricity, electronics, we've known for a long time that they're not beneficial to organic life. The Invisible Rainbow by Furstenberg, Robert Becker's work, and a number of people since have been documenting the destruction of nature of species because of electromagnetic systems. So we're organic beings. So there's plenty of evidence that it's negatively affecting us. So you almost have this battle. Like John Lilly talked about this in the Center of the Cyclone, the battle between organic and inorganic life, trying to kind of take over the running of different, planets, including the Earth. That's what Lilly talked about, and maybe he was on target with that. There's a huge difference between meditating, developing ourselves in that way through our brain, our organic brain, which is an amazing thing with tremendous untapped potential, versus relying on electronic systems, which are deteriorating our attention, deteriorating our memory, um, and hooking us into this virtual reality world that is disconnected from true human contact. I mean, it's a very strange. If you step back and look at it, it's very weird. People walking around with iPhones, and I have an iPhone, I have a smartphone, so I'm guilty as charged too. Who are on these things, communicating. I think there's benefits from it too. There's benefits in transhumanism in terms of helping paralyzed people walk and blind people see. Technology in and of itself is never a negative thing, but the direction that's going in now, especially in terms of the creation of surveillance systems and a lot of technologies that are destructive to our bodies, destructive to nature, is to me it's a sinister thing, and it's not. I don't think it's just based on human greed. Some of it is clearly, or it takes advantage of human greed, but I think that there's a broader plan out there.
Now, religious people, they would boil what you're talking about, this kind of organic path that we're on. If we were to go down the organic path and not go down this technology route, like
Mhm.
Steiner was talking about, those two different roads, religious people would call that God, right? And the spiritual people would boil that down to the universe working on their behalf. Now,
Mhm.
if in fact the universe is a living organism, or if the earth is a living organism like Steiner says it is, how would the earth know what to provide you? Would it speak in energetic language.
Mhm.
But that gets back to what I was talking and speaking to about this egregorical reality, right? That whatever you believe in, whatever you put out there, is what you receive back. So when it comes to,
Mhm.
Steiner referring to the earth as this living organism, which he wasn't the only one, and a lot of people have copied that off of him and ramped that all up into their theology and theosophy, and probably have absolutely no idea where it originally came from. Just like half the people don't know where these thoughts and these ideas actually came from. But then it also turns out that Steiner got a lot of his thoughts and his ideas and things from previous people as well. So it seems like a big regurgitation here. But what do you think on the facts of Steiner referring to the Earth and the planet and possibly even the bodies in the universe as a living organism?
Not only is that a much more aesthetically beautiful idea, I think it's probably true. So you have different layers of consciousness. If you look at like, how would the Earth communicate to us? It would communicate to us through plants. It would communicate to us with other animals. It would communicate through synchronicities. Um, and it's not just the Earth. There's other layers of being, that are uh, between or interceding between the Earth and us. Elemental beings. That's a part of a lot of spiritual traditions, or fairies, if you want to call them that. So there's a whole range of ways where things can be communicated to us if we're listening, and if we're trying to listen in. If we're not listening in, if we're watching video games and connected to some virtual reality, we're not going to connect with plants. We're not going to connect with living things. If you look at the literature on uh, the medicinal history, the shamanic medicinal history, including psychedelics, if you talk if you talk to shamans, um, they say that the plants communicated to us what plants to use. Like ayahuasca is an incredibly complex thing to create. The idea that was created by trial and error, many people are skeptical of, because people would not have lived. So if you actually listen to the people, the indigenous people, who talk about where they got their knowledge, they say they got it from other beings, plant beings, other elemental intelligences. So that's how the earth communicates to us, not through a phone in our head. If Stephen, let me just Stephen. I'm good at promoting other people's books. I probably should write one myself, but
write that
Stephen
cult book with me, bro.
Stephen Buhner's work is outstanding. The plant intelligence in the imaginal realm, the secret teachings of plants. Is a Western author who gets into all of these traditions, and there's really no logical, sensible explanation for how we learn we have such a vast knowledge of herbal medicine and uh, plant healing, uh, based on trial and error. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And if you believe in synchronicity, I think there's so many unlikely coincidences that happen that indicate that there are other intelligences out there that are trying to communicate to us and trying to guide us, usually in a positive direction, not always. Um, Sharon Rollette's work, again, on coincidences, gets into that in a lot of detail. I mean, that's like a 500-page, very academic work. She's not I wouldn't call her a woo-woo writer. She really, documents what she's talking about.
Yeah, what do you
So,
think
so
of oh, I'm sorry, go ahead and continue. My fault.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you the question of what do you think of Elena Bravlovsky? What do you think of Edgar Casey? Because I just read your most recent paper, and I really thought that it was interesting in the fact that you almost bring up, like, right off the bat, that Rudolf Steiner is not infallible, which I thought was really refreshing, because people in this community, they tend to always go with Rudolf Steiner is the prophet. He knew everything. He's done it all. He's infallible. And you start off that paper with saying, listen, Rudolf Steiner had flaws as well. So, what do you think of? Well, I guess answer that question really quickly. What do you not?
Mm.
What do you think was flawed with Rudolf Steiner? And then I'll ask the Elena Bravlovsky and Edgar Casey question, because Edgar Casey is really interesting as well. And I think that there was a little bit of weird stuff going on with him as well. Whenever he was around people, he would tend to recommend the people that were around him with his intuitive medical readings, whenever he was around just a for instance, not actually true. Whenever he was around a heart doctor, the person that had that he was reading would somehow have a heart problem that they needed. It was a bunch of things like that that was very coincidental, that the people that he was reading, he would always recommend the closest person next to him. But before we get into that, what do you think was some of Rudolf Steiner's infallibilities? If that's even a word, might have just made it up. Infallibility.
Well, I think he learned from the Rosicrucian tradition. He had his own teachers. So I don't think any one tradition has all the answers. So he didn't invent all of this stuff himself. He didn't come up with all of his ideas, his cosmology, and all that completely on his own. So that's if you want to. I wouldn't call that a flaw, but I think there's always a built-in limitation there. Um, he made some assertions in terms of race early on that were more aligned with the theosophical community, and some of them were pretty ridiculous. And he later got away from that, and got away from the whole idea of root races. And there's a big conflict in the anthroposophical community now around race and diversity, which reflects the entire world. There was a letter that he wrote where he claimed he was the reincarnation of Aristotle, which is kind of a controversial claim, to say the least. The interesting thing is a lot of his writings and his thinking, do parallel Aristotle, but, I don't know. So it's not as if there's some other tidbits of information, things that he said based on like 19th century physiognomy, which to me, probably don't have a lot of validity. So it's not as if he was always right. I mean, he embraced the science of his time. He was actually trained in engineering, so he had a pretty good scientific background. But there were certain belief systems of that age that he incorporated. That we're looking back on it, we can see the flaws in them. So.
It's interesting, Robert, because you got to always put yourself up on a pedestal, right? If you're an occult writer, you're an occult teacher, you're you're a leader of a cult, then you got to be important. And in order to be important, you have to be the reincarnation of somebody important from the past. That's a common theme through every single one of these UFO cults that I've studied. They all claim to be somebody very important from the past. Moses, Akhenaten, as many times as Jesus has been reincarnated back on the earth, and as many people has lived a past life as Jesus, we should have all been saved by now.
Oh, yeah, at least several times over. Yeah, he actually didn't share that letter with the community. That was a letter that was sent privately that he didn't want released. He didn't want. So it's not like he made that claim when he was alive. So at least I'll distinguish that. If you look at Edgar Casey's work, kind of segueing into your second question, he claimed to be like Rata, who was this being who was from Atlantis who helped build the pyramids. So it's how do you establish that that's true? How do you test something like that? I think Casey has some credibility because of his medical readings, where he sometimes he came up with some treatments that weren't known by the people around him. They certainly weren't part of medical science at that time. I think that gives him some validity, but some of his predictions about world events don't seem to be coming true, or at least not coming true in the timeline that he talked about. and he also, claimed to. I think he claimed that his son and he were Achilles and Ajax or something like that. So you have that. This is one thing, if you're going to dive into these occult teachers, is to keep an open mind to the fact that they may have been somewhat self-deluded uh, themselves, besides being imperfect human beings and beings of their, humans of their time who had the prejudices of their time, which is we all do. There is this sense that you have to be discerning in looking at their work. That there's the wheat and the chaff. Steiner to me is probably the most out of the major occult teachers of the late 19th, early 20th century. He's the one who I think has the most credibility because the things that he predicted, and I get into that a lot in a paper that I just wrote, were pretty extraordinary um, in terms of the development of machines and how the man-machine relationship is going to be so important. Predictions in regards to technology, some of his insights into even the nutrition. He talked about the gut-brain connection over 100 years ago, how important metabolism and what we were eating, nutrition was for brain functioning, which at that time was people thought he was crazy. Biodynamic gardening is one major form of organic gardening or agriculture, which is taken on. And he developed the Waldorf and Campbell schools, which they have their controversies too. But I think that there's a lot of validity in their educational approaches. So probably more so than Gurdjieff or Casey or Blavatsky, I think his work has really promoted some positive developments. He also didn't, in terms of his personality, he was very very well liked, very humble. Um, I don't know if and no one has written any sort of expose on Steiner saying that he secretly was this egotistical, narcissistic personality. No one. So, and you certainly see that with Gurdjieff and Blavatsky, who was quite a character. So some of why I'm a little bit more impressed with Steiner is just who he was as a human being. But I don't think he was, you know, I don't think he knew everything. I don't think he would, he was he he wasn't in favor of the whole guru concept. He didn't really like that, and he didn't really like a lot of attention or adulation. So he's a little bit different, I think, than some of the other characters we're talking about. Casey seemed to have been a pretty decent human being too, by all accounts, but I'm just skeptical of some parts of his work, um, or at least it's wise to be skeptical of them. I can't prove or disprove them, right? Some of the Steiner wrote about Atlantis too. I don't have any way to. We don't have geological records where you look back and say, okay, this is accurate.
That's what I was just getting ready to ask. Did he ever refer to a past civilization that may have been as advanced as we are now and then ended up collapsing and then we're going on that same exact route currently?
Yes. I mean, he and Casey actually were pretty much aligned in that regard. They both had that same idea that Atlanteans were reincarnating, that we're going to have the same sort of cataclysmic disasters that are going to happen as happened to Atlantis. A lot of the same good versus evil forces at work. They even pinpointed some of the same years, like 1933 was a big year in Casey's readings, and it was a big year in Steiner's. And Steiner died in 1925, but he pinpointed 1933 as a critical year for human history. And 1998, they both pinpoint 1998. There's a lot of similarities in some of their writings, in Steiner's lectures, his writings, Casey's readings. There's a lot of overlap, and they both believe that there was Lemuria and Atlantis in Steiner's and in Casey's cosmology. Human consciousness, human souls existed, eons before we incarnated. So we've been developing not just on this planet, but elsewhere. So there's a very long history to humanity, according to both of them, which seems plausible to me. I just don't know if they were right about all the particulars. If they, uh, were always accurate historians.
What did anything special happen in 1998? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I don't think anything in 1933 either.
Well,
That was the
1933
end of the Great Depression was already over by 33, correct?
yeah, according to Steiner, that's when Christ would appear in the etheric realm. He would start to manifest more in the etheric realm. He never believed that Christ would incarnate again physically. There's only one incarnation of Christ. Casey said essentially the same thing. And there's readings in Casey about 1933 indicating that there would be some what do they call them, the new king, kind of a king of evil that would come into play in 1933. January of 33 is when Hitler took power. So that is kind of interesting. So Hitler did emerge in 1933, and it was unlikely. It was a series of political maneuvers in the background that put him into power. He actually was losing votes. He was losing uh, followers, and then in their infinite wisdom, these German politicians decided, "Oh, we can control Hitler, and we'll put him into power." And that happened January 30th, I think, of 1933. So that's there. One interesting thing, Casey did make some specific prophecies that came true. He predicted the Dead Sea Scrolls would be found, and he picked the year, and he said a shepherd would find them by accident. So that's pretty impressive. And I think it was 49 or 47, whenever they were found. He had the exact year, and he said that they would be found kind of accidentally by a shepherd wandering around finding them in a cave. That's essentially was in one of his readings. A lot of what he wrote about his description of the Essenes, who are connected to the Dead Sea Scrolls, seem to be pretty much right on, based upon the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, Casey died in 45. He died several years before they were physically found. So it's things like that that lend some credibility to Casey as well. But I still, maybe it's just a skeptical side of me, but there's elements in both of their writings that I'm also a bit suspicious of, and I don't know exactly what that means. So whether I wouldn't throw out all their work because of Steiner saying that he was the reincarnation of Aristotle. I wouldn't throw out all of Casey's work because he said he was Rata from Atlantis who helped build the pyramids. I don't know. Maybe it's true, but there's no real evidence for it. There's no written records or chronological records that establish the existence of these people.
Yeah, that's just the common occurrence with researching all these cults, is that they're always the reincarnation of someone very important in the past, and all of them are wrong about every single thing that they've ever said. So not looking too good for people that have are claiming to be past life reincarnations of famous historical people. Now, F. Kitty says, how would you know if you lived a past life versus downloading a past life or a version of it? Well, my personal opinion, if people aren't just making up stuff, which I think a large percentage of them are just making it up because they want to feel important. And that's why very few people ever live a past life of a layman's person. Very few people are stone builders or things like that. Everyday life people. They're always someone very important. The only explanation that I have for that, which is complete theology and theosophy, is that I personally believe that whenever you die, your consciousness is fractured. So whenever you pass away, your consciousness fractalizes and then goes to several people at the same time. And if people are telling the truth that they actually experienced something that happened to them a long time ago, that they lived a past life. And again, I think 95% of these people that are claiming this nonsense are just making it up. If they aren't making it up, then it would make sense as to why people are experiencing the almost identical same past lives, because they're just fractions, they're fractaled off consciousnesses that are being placed into multiple people at the same time. So therefore, multiple people can then have that same experience. What do you think, Robert?
Well, that's an interesting theory. I haven't heard it quite explained in that way in terms of fracturing into different pieces. There's the whole multiverse theory, the idea that all of us have lived all possible previous lives, and I could have lived a life as you. You could have lived a life as me, and that when we meet, there's because we've had a life together. We've encountered each other. There's some sort of simpatico there. Um, I don't. No one has the definitive answer, for something like that. I mean, how would you know if something's a download? Well, yeah, it's interesting that Steiner talked about the Akashic records. So did Casey, and Steiner was asked about, what if you encounter an intelligence like a Goethe um, in the Akashic records? Can you have a conversation with them? And he said, yes. Not only can you have a conversation with them, but that piece of their consciousness continues to evolve. So in some weird way, we never die. And again, I don't know if that's true or not. I just think it's pretty interesting that it's much more complicated than just a linear series of lives that we have. Um, but one thing I do believe in, that there is some form of life after death, that we do move on. Now, Anthony Peake talks about cheating the ferryman. His whole theory of that we come back as ourselves over and over again. Uh, Not in a Groundhog Day kind of way where it's repeating the same thing, but we have, we live our lives over and over again until we make different choices. And it's like the myth of the eternal return kind of thing, which is, another interesting theory. I think we can pick apart any kind of theory and say, it has its flaws. I think they're all kind of interesting. The multiverse theory is kind of interesting, that over time, any possible outcome will happen, right? And any possible incarnation will happen. So that there isn't any one, like my life. My lifetimes haven't been just separate from everyone else's and linear. They're connected to yours, connected to everyone else's. Kind of not dissimilar to what you were saying. I think in some ways that our consciousness splits off. I think people can tap into information and that's out there, so in the ether, so to speak, and personalize it too much, and say, well, I'm tapping into this memory of this person from 1600. I must have been there. I must have been reincarnated. I must have been them in a past life. Well, maybe not. Maybe you're just tapping into some information that's out there, that's encoded in some way about their life, and has nothing to do with your lives. So this is the
That's
stuff of science fiction, where you can. There's probably 100 different scenarios you can create and make good movies about them, but no one really knows for sure.
yeah. Then that also gets into the thought that, like what you were just talking about, that we're incarnated with our soul group essentially. So
Mhm.
every incarnation that you have, you're surrounded by the same people from that previous incarnation. They're just in
Mhm.
a different body, and you just
Mhm.
don't remember them, but you remember them like energetically.
Mhm.
But you're with the same group of people, the people that you know that's in your friend group you've always been with, and your
Yeah.
family you've always been with. Now, I don't
Well,
prescribe to that theory. I don't think that theory. I just think that it's interesting, and it kind of goes along with what you're talking about as well.
I think for some people that would be their version of hell, but um, depending depending on who you're incarnating with. Well, in terms of Steiner, he did believe that. He believed that there were um, groups that over many lifetimes would incarnate together. That's part of his whole his concepts of karma. That we would often alternate between male and female. We would often alternate between being socially outgoing versus being more introverted. He didn't use those terms, introverted, extroverted, but he described it in that way. Um, so he did talk about the life review, which is kind of interesting. I mean, 150 years ago, whatever, he wrote about when we die, we have a life review, which later came out, in a lot of the near-death experience literature. So his books on karma are pretty interesting. I think they're he talks about the past lives of famous people, and it's pretty intriguing. But then he makes, to me, what seems strange and assertions that I'm skeptical of, that his math teacher was the reincarnation of Plato. So um, I don't think so, Rudolph. I doubt that. Could that be true? I mean, I don't know. But again, I think with these people, you have to be able to keep two different separate thoughts in mind, simultaneously. That that there's wisdom there, there's definite knowledge there, but don't believe everything they say. And the human beings, a lot of what they say is going to be colored by their their perspectives. Sometimes their agendas as well. If they have a particular agenda, whether that's becoming a guru or becoming famous or whatever. Um, but again, if you look at the personality of Steiner, how he treated people, he's haven't read any negative accounts of him. No one has stepped up and said, behind the scenes, no, he was a real, whatever. Universally, he seems to have been very loved, and that's quite a contrast with a lot of other, um, teachers. I think a lot of people took the knowledge of people like Blavatsky, Casey, and Steiner, as we've talked about privately, and distorted them and created cults around, mishmash of ideas.
Well, that's another thing too, is how much of this stuff was actually backed by something, and then how much of it was just compounded upon and then created in its own version. That's what I mean by this egregore, this egregoric reality. It's like what you were mentioning earlier with Bud Hopkins, right? No one talked about missing time before Bud Hopkins. He basically created the missing time name. And then after that book came out, Missing Time, it then then everyone started saying that they had missing time, And then same with Whitley Strieber's book with the gray aliens. Hardly no one ever called aliens gray aliens until his book Communion came out. And then all of a sudden, everyone was seeing gray aliens. So how much of it's almost exactly like what you just said with Rudolph Steiner saying about this life review. Like, how many people have we heard in the community talk about a life review? Hundreds and hundreds of people talk about a life review. So is that something that has been created? Is it real and then it's been permeated, or is it completely fictitious and then we have then created it in our minds, and therefore by creating it in our minds it becomes real?
You're talking about a couple of different layers here. You're talking about the cultural reality of people using ideas, right? And sometimes distorting them. You're talking about also the concept of egregores, that once a group of people start to believe something or see something, then it starts to manifest, right? So those are two different levels that both have validity. The reality in terms of like the grays is that grays were seen long before Strieber. I think he popularized them, but there are accounts of gray beings and a whole variety of different beings connected to UFOs or whatever for a long period of time. The grays actually resemble elementals in the theosophical, anthroposophical literature,
Right, the fairies.
Fairies and really gnomic beings in particular. If you read descriptions of gnomic beings from late 19th, early 20th century, they're grays. The grays appeared in the skull experiments. One was called Blue. It looks like a gray, and they supposedly communicated with Blue. So
well, you can say that Aleister Crowley was one of the first people to describe what a gray. I mean, in the terms of the title of it, because I think the person that popularizes a concept is really is what matters. It doesn't really make a difference who came up with it first. It really matters who popularized the concept. And from my research and from my understanding, no one called what they were experiencing gray aliens until Whitley Strieber came out with Communion. and then they were called gray aliens. Just like there might have been a different title for or a different name for missing time before Bud Hopkins, but Bud Hopkins had a bunch of different things. He was the first person to talk about screened memories. He's one that popularized that term of screen of the aliens or the extraterrestrials putting a layer of memory that is false and fake over your real memory so that you can't actually realize exactly what was happening. I know those two for 100% a fact. Now, that doesn't mean that people weren't experiencing what Woodley Strieber called gray aliens before that, but I mean, as in like the title of it, in the popularization of it, because it seemed like after that book came out, then everybody was experiencing what he talked about within that book, just like Bud Hopkins and missing time. No one called it missing time. No one had really experienced missing time till that book came out, and then all of a sudden everyone's missing time. Well, I had a really weird experience. I had some missing time. It must have been an alien abduction. It must have had an extraterrestrial encounter.
Well, yeah, I think that's there's a lot of dangers there in people taking an idea like that and running with it. I mean, long before the UFO phenomenon, long before Bud Hopkins, there were fugue states. There's multiple personalities who have missing time. Part experiences that they can't account for. So missing time is not a new thing. It was a new thing in terms of the UFO literature. So once an idea like that gets out there, does it do you have people come out of the woodwork, who have had genuine experiences like that? Do people come out of the woodwork who are making it up or exaggerating? Who knows? Then it comes down to the integrity of the person and who you believe. Just like with the life review. I mean, there's so many thousands of people in near-death experiences who talk about the life review. It's hard to believe that they're all conspiring in some way to create this myth of a life review. And that's been around long before we called it a life review. So I tend to think there's probably credibility to that because of the frequency and the consistency of people reporting that, and the fact that it didn't just come out in the 1960s books on near-death experiences. It's been around for a long time. The same thing with grays and other beings. And now there's experiences are coming forward and saying it wasn't grays, it was mantid beings. I had an experience like that when I was 8 years old. So I don't necessarily think they're aliens. I don't know what the hell they were, but I can remember that clearly myself. And there are plenty of people out there who've seen other varieties of beings. So it's not as if once Strieber came out with the book, people only saw grays, and that was a kind of a fixed egregore concept, and that was it. So it's more complicated than that. But it would be nice if all this were simple. But I think that there are cultural factors that can be distorted, or can lead us into putting too much credibility into certain ideas. There are ideas that are kind of stolen, and again, sort of like the UFO cults that you've researched. They're a mishmash of all sorts of occult stuff, which together has no substance because these people are just con people, men and women, who are just creating cults. Or they're deluded individuals, or some combination of those things. It doesn't mean that the ideas themselves don't have validity. But skepticism is always a good thing.
So you just mentioned that you don't believe that what you experienced was aliens. I want to dig into that a little bit, if you don't mind. What do you think that they were? Don't tell me interdimensional, Robert. Don't tell me extra dimensional, interdimensional, phasing in and out of reality, people.
I have no idea. I can only tell you what I saw.
Well, tell us what you saw.
Interdimensional idea is just as good as any other.
I just see it as an excuse. It's an excuse, just like the Bigfoot stuff. It's an excuse for God. It's an excuse for Jesus. Where are they? What are they doing? Oh, well, you can't see them. Well, they're spirits. They're interdimensional. They're extra dimensional. I just see it as a huge excuse to obfuscate what is actually going on. But that's my personal opinion.
Well, I would say it's a counter because we have no idea what it is. Just like we have no idea what consciousness is. Everyone uses the term consciousness.
Hmm.
No one knows what it is. So it's a counter, it's a filler until we maybe figure out what it is. And personally, I think consciousness has to do with being. You can't have one without the other. So ontology is much more important to me than consciousness. But that's my prejudice. And that's why I think cosmology is important. Like there are definitely other intelligent beings out there, whether they are physical beings like us living in our dimension, in some planet, in, you know, is it a reticuli or whatever. And there are definitely beings that seem to be able to move in and out of dimensions. So I wouldn't, um, again, that term doesn't bother me. It doesn't really mean much, though. I think you're right. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. What does that mean? Well, what dimension are they coming from? We don't know. It's just it's a filler term. But I think did you have a question? Oh, you wanted to know about my experiences?
Yeah. Just tell us about
Yeah, yeah.
what you experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked about this in another podcast, but when I was 8 years old, I had visitations from what I described as manted beings, and some of what I saw was when I was conscious, and scared me quite a bit. Some of it was when I was in the dream state, and I had what people call downloads now about future events, and um, I remember this kind of what I would describe as microfiche almost. There were these written contents that was somehow being I was seeing was going too fast for me to keep up with, and that oddly enough is something that other experiencers talk about. That somehow the this whatever this download is faster than our conscious mind can process it. I was 8 years old at that time, so I didn't know what was going on. This was in '68, long before long before, no, 60, yeah, well, 60, December 67, January 68. So it's long before any of this stuff came out. Later on, I kind of put it together. And actually, in terms of like Strieber's book, I came across it and said, well, I had something like that happen to me, but it wasn't gray beings. It was these, mantid-like beings. And then other people have talked about mantid beings. So who knows? I mean, one thing that came across clearly was that there'd be a nuclear attack by China. That was something that was a clear prediction or vision that was part of that whole experience, which in 67, 68 seemed pretty unlikely. It doesn't seem so unlikely now. And I've talked about this for years. So who knows?
That's interesting. What else
Well,
did they say?
they didn't give me any winning lottery numbers or anything like that, unfortunately. So
If they did, you
um,
wouldn't be here right now.
yeah, I'd be someplace else, I guess. I don't know, but uh, they seem to be implanting things. There is some visions of floods, ecological disasters. This is all very classic. It's not like my experience was unique by any means, right? But what does this all mean? Why did they choose me? Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? I'm supposed to like go to Washington and say, China's going to attack us? I don't know. I'm quite sure they're aware that China may attack us. Maybe that won't happen. I sure hope it doesn't happen. I don't think that um, our futures are predestined either. I think there's a lot we can do to change things, but it's not within my power to affect any of the things that I saw. And that's one of the great um, quandaries about all this is that why are you coming to me, some 7, 8 year old kid, and planning this stuff or downloading it, whatever? What am I supposed to do with this? Like, why not just like go to the White House and tell them something's going on? Maybe that's happening too. I don't know. Somehow I doubt it.
Well, there was a few cults that actually did that. One in the United States, and the other, I think, in Czechoslovakia. Maybe I can't remember. I'd have to look back through my notes. But one lady did that. She went to the United States and was like, "Hey, this is how we build a." She went directly to the government and was like, "This is how we build a space station. This is how we protect ourselves from extraterrestrials." One dude went to the government and said that with a detailed plan on how to protect its citizens, the country's citizens, from an evil extraterrestrial reptilian attack.
Yeah, those reptilians, you really got to watch out for them, apparently. But I can't say I've ever seen a reptilian. Some people have said they've seen reptilians. Maybe they're part of the whole thing of, there's mantid beings and grays and all sorts of elemental beings coming through, and who knows? Sky, what is that? That ranch out that they have the TV show about out in New Mexico. That famous ranch. What is it called?
Skinwalker Ranch.
Skinwalker Ranch, and there you have skinwalkers. We have all sorts of weird, cryptic creatures appearing. So who knows, where they're all coming from? Is there validity? Is all this nonsense? No, I can't believe all this is nonsense. There's just way too many people seeing way too many things, and there are correlations, there are patterns, but they're not. They're certainly not easy to figure out. And one thing that like Jacques Vallée and John Keel talked about in the 60s was this can't be a simple ET visit because there's such a variety of different they appear in such a variety of different forms. It's interesting. J. Allen Hynek was a reader of Rudolf Steiner and believed that Steiner's cosmology explained a lot of the UFO phenomenon.
Well, I think Carl Jung's philosophy really explains the whole UFO phenomenon to a T, actually. He believes that he believed that it was our perception of them that created them, which is...
No, he didn't necessarily believe that. I think that's not an accurate portrayal of Jung. I think that he saw the UFO phenomena as kind of synchronistic with changes in human civilization, that it was an indicator that pretty momentous changes were coming. He considered it pretty ominous. He didn't have a good feeling about it. He thought that they were, in the form that they came to us, they were projections of the unconscious in some way that we could understand. But he didn't believe that we human beings created them, that they didn't have a reality outside of us. He didn't never said that. He also said that hallucinations don't show up on radar. He was
if something changes though along with us, then that would be our perception, and that would mean that we were creating it. Though he might not have said, "Oh, hey, we're creating this," or that they're not real. But if our perception around something changes and something changes along with that perception, that's implying that it's not real. In my view, anyway.
Well, he used the term psychoid. That's an interesting term they use not just with UFOs, but with other things. And those are experiences that are physical and mental. Like his spiritual guide Philemon, he said he walked around with him in the garden, that he would appear as a physical being. Other times he would speak to Jung. People have speculated maybe Jung was schizophrenic. Well, to me, it's calling him schizophrenic is useless. The man's ideas were, despite his faults too, he certainly contributed a lot to human understanding. And concepts like extroversion, introversion, collective unconscious, and so forth, they come from Jung. Synchronicity comes from Jung. So he had a pretty powerful impact. He's a pretty brilliant man. But he never said UFOs were purely psychological. He never said they were purely physical. He called them psychoid, partaking of physical and mental.
That's interesting. What else would be physical and mental in our reality? I can't think of anything else that would be like that.
Well, pretty much everything is, at some level. So it's both mental and physical. We're both mental and physical beings. So we can see, we can have an hallucination, and we know physically there's nothing that it's not there, but it's in our it has an impact on our senses. So it's something that we're encoding through our senses. So that's psychoid in nature. And I'm not saying that all psychic phenomena are hallucinations. That's, you talk about interdimensional beings and consciousness being counters and boilerplate concepts. To call things that we don't know hallucinations is just just kicking the ball down the road.
Yeah, I think that what he was saying was way more nuanced than my blanketed statement of what I said that he said. But the point, I think, is still the same. That he's pretty much saying that it's a manifestation of our own mind, just like you're mentioning a hallucination would be. A hallucination isn't a physical manifestation into a 3D reality. It's a mental manifestation.
Well, you have the whole shape-shifting idea, right? The whole idea that there are actual beings out there that can shape-shift, and they'll appear to us in a form that we can understand. So that's what do you make of that? Jung actually believed in a spiritual world. He believed that there were spirits interacting with us. He didn't talk about that early in his career, but he talked about that later in his career. For instance, he wrote a lot about the I Ching, and he believed that system of divination connected with beings who would direct, the divination. So he definitely believed in other realities and other beings that were part of. He didn't think everything was just in the human psyche, but he did see the UFO phenomenon as a reflection of developments in the human psyche, for sure. I mean, and the form that it takes is something that we can, in some way, can enter into our reality in some way. Otherwise, it wouldn't affect us.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I need to look more into Carl Jung. I've wanted to get some Jungian analysis people on my show, but they keep refusing because they're constantly being attacked in the community.
Really? They're being attacked in the community?
Yeah, people, a lot of the nuts and bolts UFO researcher people don't want to hear that. A lot of ufology don't want to hear that it's more than likely our psyche that's creating these things. So they're getting pounded on hardcore within the community.
Well, again, the key concept I think to understand with Jung is the concept of what is psychoid and what does that mean? What does it mean for something to be physical and at the same time mental, to partake of both realities? Because it's not UFO phenomena is not just nuts and bolts, and it's not just intrapsychic. It's both. That's probably the most powerful concept that Jung developed, I think, in his whole psychology. Maybe that and synchronicity. There's the whole idea of things, the idea of the psychoid, this sort of in between realm, where things are definitely not just nuts and bolts. But the communities, I don't pay attention to UFO personally. I pay no attention to the UFO community.
It's full of a bunch of nonsense. The lady that I was referring to that brought her plans to the United States government, her name was Gloria Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually died of starvation. She was on a hunger strike because apparently the government didn't take her plans to build a space station seriously, and she went 66 days without eating. Then she was taken to the hospital and died there in 1962 at the age of 36.
I know that story, but that's another sad story, connected with. I mean, there's a lot of sad stories in the UFO field of people who committed suicide, and same thing with the conspiracy theorists in general. There's a lot of there. There's a lot of truth in a lot of conspiracy theories, and then there's just so much nonsense that you have to wade through, and personal opinion and distortion, and also disinformation coming from other places. So it's very confusing.
I think it's a breeding ground for mental illness, psychosis, paranoia, and schizophrenia.
Yeah, it can certainly be a breeding ground for paranoia. And I don't. If someone called me a conspiracy theorist, I wouldn't deny it in a lot of ways, because I think there's a lot of truth to a lot of the weirdness that's going on. But ultimately, it's you have to come to some sort of peace with it
I think
and
the
move on with
alternative
your life.
community and the conspiracy community is mainstream media for people that don't like mainstream media. I think it's become its own
Mm,
culture. It's become its own place. We have these figureheads within the community that everything that they say is
mm,
taken as gospel. It's exactly like
mm,
mainstream media. It's turned into its own subsection of the community, and you got your main gatekeepers, just like you have your Fox
mm.
News, your CNN, your ABC, your CSNBC. It's almost a verbatim the exact same thing as mainstream media.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a great observation, and that's a window into human psychology. I mean, that's how human beings work, right? It's hopefully we can, in some way get beyond that. But I think that some of that is inevitable. So again, it requires a lot of discernment. I mean, that's also why, I don't, as much as I believe that Steiner had a lot of incredible insights and probably knowledge, I don't, I don't believe everything he said. I think that that's very dangerous. I think adopting any one kind of idea or one person as the authority on the phenomena we're talking about, there's just no reason to do that, because there's just no way that one perspective, one person, has even a fraction of the answers, no less all of them. And there's so much disinformation too, and there's just you have the hucksterism that goes on too. We have people making stuff up. You have all these battles between people and lawsuits, and I just stay out of all that. I don't have any time for that.
Absolutely, and that's why I love having you on, Robert. I trust your judgment and trust your stories and your experiences over a lot of people in the community. And with that, let people know where they can find you if they would like to read your most recent article that you put out on Steiner. Where can they find
Mhm.
that?
It's an Alternate Perceptions magazine. It came out December 1st. Came out yesterday. Brent Rains is the editor. Brent wrote kind of the book on John Keel. He's a great researcher himself. He has some nice pieces in that edition. And there's a number of other good writers in that edition. But you can find my paper on Steiner and the Ahrimanic incarnation in Alternate Perceptions. I also wrote an article on UFOs and Steiner's cosmology in the June of 2023 edition of Alternate Perceptions. So if you're interested in what I've written, you can look up Alternate Perceptions, June of this year and December 1st of this year.
Thanks so much for coming on, Robert. Really appreciate it. Always a lovely
Sure.
conversation.
Always
Hope
fun.
everyone else enjoyed it as well. And much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithms. How's it going, GG? Nina, Sam, thanks for being here, brother. F Kitty, good to see you. And anybody else? Jenna Banana, good to see you, Jenna Banana. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up, help the channel and algorithm, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And I will be back. I'm going to stop saying that I'm going to be back on a certain date, because every time I say that I'm going to be back on a certain date, it doesn't seem to ever work out. So we'll see you guys. Check all my links in the description as well. Check my documentary, JFKX Solving the Crime of the Century, on Amazon Prime now for a really affordable price. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. Peace.